Hi, welcome to Integration, where we explore the art of moving forward, not just sustaining, but transforming. The great ones among us don't see setbacks, only the landscape of possibility before them. My guests have learned to navigate what is, which is what inspires me, to find ways to keep going and leave the world better than they found it. When the storm comes, they don't just endure, they lean into it. I hope you enjoy my guest today. Hello, everybody. I'm Samantha from Integration, and my guest today is Rich Bradbury from the intersecting points, as I understand it, of Oregon, California, and Nevada, which I have never been up that far. But it's for those of us who are not in America and don't know American geography, it's on the left side of the map on the west, certainly above LA. From about that point onwards, I will say that Rich comes from a long background of ranching in America and with particular focus around the regenerative. As part of this podcast, is really about really connecting you all with people that have survived this space. This is an industry that you have to have, shall we say, balls of steel. Keep going through all of this. On that note, I'm going to open up to Rich and get him to tell you a little bit about his background and where he came from and the size of the land that he's currently running, as well as the network of people that he particularly is his audience.
Wow, my audience is huge. I didn't say that egotistically. It's a lot.
Well, it's good.
Wow. So I'm from southeastern Oregon. The geography of it is it's the Great Basin, which is sort of parts of Idaho, Oregon, Utah, most of Nevada, parts of Northern California. And it's one of the only places in the United States where the water doesn't go to the ocean. It's mostly Great Basin sagebrush steppe. We have this sagebrush, and the sagebrush has what they call the sage microbiome, which is its own little environments underneath the sage. So just hundreds and hundreds of miles of it.
We've got something similar in the inner Australia called saltbush, and that doesn't go anywhere other than within its own microsphere as well. So it's very pure.
Yeah. And it's I was researching it. I got in an argument with a guy that said we were overgrazing it, and that's why it happened. But it's actually 2.5 million years old. This particular sagebrush steppe is 25,000 years old. They migrate a little bit based on climate. So it's a perfectly healthy environment, and cows really thrive in it. I do soil samples all the time. And this year, when I pull my soil samples, I'm going to go pull soil samples out of the steppe, the sagebrush, just to show that even in that, we have really good, healthy soils, like people would expect. It's really open, big, huge blue skies. I imagine there's quite a few places in Australia that are similar. And it's a really unique culture. It was originally at the northern end of the Spanish land grant. A lot of California's Spanish land grant. It's been under different flags, but where I'm at, it was the northernmost of that. And so we have a cowboy culture here that is based in Spanish vaquero. So lots of flat hats, different riding style. So it's very unique. We go by buckaroo, not cowboy, but we're cowboys just the same. But the culture is buckaroo culture, lots of cowboy poetry. We don't manage cattle like on pastures. So I have pasture cattle, but I also have a bunch of cattle that go into the rangeland, and it's mind-blowingly big. It's a federal permit that we run on with multiple ranchers, and it's probably there's stations in Australia that are bigger than it, but yeah, it's about 425,000 acres.
That's a good size. 125,000 is the average size for a big farm in Australia. That's not small.
Yeah. Anyways, but we're only out there 6 months out of the year. Then we come back to the valleys where there's water, and
it snows where you are. It's a snowing part of the country.
Oh yeah, we just got through one of the biggest snowstorms we've probably had in the last 20 years. It's still thawing out, and it's been a challenge, hard on the calves to get them going. It's cold and snowy at the same time.
I saw your post on that, and the calf was doing very well from what I could see.
Oh yeah, this is the first year, and it was good timing. I moved my calving date up by a month and a half, and so most of my calves were born when it was still pretty mild. So they were pretty equipped to handle the cold weather. We had some born during the cold weather, but most of them were calved out, so we were pretty happy with that decision. It could hurt us again. You never know when January is going to be the bad month, but this year it's February.
That's really cool. I'm find it fascinating because I'm assuming your snow level also indicates what your spring rains will be like, and therefore your reservoirs for the summer. Is that correct? Like a good snow is a good thing for you?
Yes, because we rely, where I ranch, we rely a lot on watershed. So snowmelt, we don't even have, we have reservoirs. I don't particularly, my ranch isn't on a reservoir. It's just streams from the mountains runoff. So we need to have a good snowpack to have a good summer. And this year has been good. It wasn't looking good up until about mid-January, and then it really came on. So,
and your rain is sort of as an idea of that. If you're living completely on rain, that means that your rivers are flowing all the way through summer, that you don't get drought where the rivers actually completely dry up and you've got no water.
No, we're still in the desert. So we rely on all the snowpacks, but our annual precipitation is between 7 and 12 inches. When we speak about regenerative, most everybody looks at Joel Salatin and Will Harris at White Oak Pastures or Polyface Farm. And I think that Will Harris gets like 76 inches of rain a year, something crazy. Oh. And so that's the context of regenerative agriculture is it can't all look the same. And so when I talk about regenerative agriculture, the type of regenerative agriculture I'm talking about is vastly different than what it looks like in Georgia or Polyface Farms. I'm not sure where Joel's at.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I listen to a lot of stuff as well, and we're 2/3 desert in Australia, so we're primarily used to no water. So I've got farms growing wheat in, I remember listening to a podcast recently that 187 mils for the whole year. It's a very small amount of rain. I think people don't really fully get it because a lot of the scientists talk too much about the top agronomic 6 inches or 10 centimeters just under the root structure, whereas in the regenerative, we're talking meters into the ground and the permeability of the rain that does fall to actually stay there rather than run off. So it's probably, I think, the biggest single factor to get across because the science isn't backing it up. So it's one of the reasons I sent to you before you came on, if you'd seen Peter Bick's new movies, because mainly he got 13 different scientific disciplines. It's a lot. They've got 13 papers up now. Scientific peer-reviewed papers are now on the website, which is unheard of because we all know by observation, but nobody believes us from God, there's no science on it. But it's like, well, do you really need science? I've been saying, take a shovel, stick it in the ground. It's really obvious. But so it's very interesting listening even through that movie that 4 out of the 5 farmers that were conventional actually chose to go regenerative from the science, not the observation, even though they'd right next door to the other farm. And that's the thing that's always blown me away, is that they can see there's more water, they can see all that stuff. But some of the things that really got them across the line were these things like there was 193 birds on the farm next door and they had 3 birds. I mean, like what? You've got to see how massive that is from an ecological point of view, apart from anything else.
Yeah.
So my big question to you in all of this is when you face all that negativity, because as you say, we'll talk a little bit about before we go into that, talk a little bit about your network or your audience or the people you talk to, and then what are the problems that you come across and how do you address them?
I think I've evolved as I've grown my network to be more sympathetic. My family since the 80s has been into holistic resource management, which my parents were some of the people that went to the Savory Institute when it was in Albuquerque, New Mexico in the 80s. And so they really took it to heart, came back. And when you talk about the science versus what you see, I think that you could say that was very much some of Savory's early problems because he was creating these great landscapes and science hadn't caught up with him yet. Science has pretty much caught up with him now. And so you just had to go on faith. And so it's been difficult there's been 2 different things. My parents started after they did the Savory Institute, they got with some other ranchers in Oregon that had also been to the Savory Institute and started a beef co-op. It was very small for a long time. It was 12 people. And then it grew to 30 people, and now it's over 100. We're not part of it. We're doing a similar thing with the grass-fed group, and it's very small. It's 20 people or so. And I always remember when I was going to school in Eastern Oregon at the university, I was that guy. I was that rancher that did the things differently. Having grown up in it, it wasn't something that I didn't realize how sort of outside of the box my parents operated. So it was natural. And, but it was sort of a tough adjustment. And that's sort of when I got linked in because my regenerative doesn't look like the regenerative that's out there. Because I have sagebrush, I have this desert environment. We're very reliant on water. We have to manage the water closely. So telling that story was sort of interesting, but people have been pretty receptive to it. And I try and keep that. I really like Gabe Brown wrote his book, Dirt to Soil, and he had the 9 characteristics. And then he went back and added context. And by him doing that, it's one of those things that really changed my perspective, because then I was able to better frame what I was doing and add context to it so people could understand what it was.
That's great.
And I've been on several podcasts of people that are growing the fake meat.
Impossible burgers.
Yeah. And I talk to everybody, and after visiting with them and seeing that transition over the last 4 years, more anchored in this, I've come to the point where I really think that it's all about soil, good, healthy soil, and what that soil is translating into the plants that we're either eating through vegetables or what the cow's eating from the protein density of that grass, and how that translates into health. And
did you find in the Impossible Burgers farms that you visited that they were also looking at soil or not?
I couldn't say. I visited with advocates, I guess, for those types of things. And I'm so used to reading the conventional beef industries. Okay, I want to say property. And I think that is equally as misleading as when you talk to somebody that's all protein or cultivated beef. I just don't think many people play it down the middle, and I think the middle is the soil. When we talk about what the health of the soil is, then we can have a real grand conversation.
It's interesting that, because Gabe Brown's book I know is seminal for Americans, but there's actually been a lot more books about soil that are much earlier than that, like Francois Chaboussier, I think I'm saying it right, was in the 50s. And, we've certainly had a lot of people with the soil space in Australia for a long, long time. And it's interesting. I mean, my business partner he's been advocating for farmers to get paid for carbon since the 70s. So it's interesting how long it's taking for soil to take the front seat, when it's historically the evidence of civilizations waxing and waning is the soil. And yet still we seem hell-bent on following that same bizarre pattern of not following that.
Yeah. So it is a weird paradox that we're in.
And so what are you finding when you're out there talking to farmers? Are they starting to get the soil message now? Is the carbon message, even with money attached to it, has that made any impact at all? I don't know how it is, the carbon market in America.
That's how we met, was visiting about the carbon market. So I can tell you that I think that it's a very narrow. My perspective is that if you look at Savory and Smuts's holism, you're solving for the many parts of the whole. And the carbon market to me is just pulling on a thread of the whole. And the approach I don't like to call it a carbon market, because it was never set up to be a market, because my theory is that the person that originates the carbon is the person that should control that carbon. And I don't know how it was in Australia, but to register your carbon or get a carbon credit here, you had to use a third party, and then you had to turn that carbon over to that third party. I could never.
Similar, but it's not really. You make a contract with the government who is willing. We're the first really regulated standard around soil. I bought the first soil carbon credit in Australia, which got the government recognising soil as mainly it's always been trees. But the regulator is the impartial, let's say, registry, and they will discount a percentage that you're due based on how many years you're willing to sign up for. So if you do 100 years, you get all of it. If you do 25 years, you get a 50%. Because who's going to be around for that long, sort of thing. So I don't know that I'd call that taking it so much as, I just see what you're saying, but there are some companies that say, well, we won't charge you any upfront costs to go and measure it and do all that, and then we'll own it and sell it for you, and you get this amount. So I think that's an individual deal rather than the market itself, and that's the farmer's choice based on their own economic situation.
Yeah, that's probably the difference in Australia. Most people that approached me about carbon, I said, okay, so you're going to get more, you're going to measure this, which is going to not be the cost of the whole thing. So you can take whatever it costs you to measure that, keep that in carbon, and then give me the remaining credits. And they just always told me that I didn't understand how it worked. And so I always said, well, I'm not going to sell you my carbon then, because it's something that is, I look at it like a cow or a bushel of wheat. I produced it. I should have the opportunity to sell it as a commodity, should have the opportunity to insure it and to hedge it.
You could do that if you don't use the American, well, there are international standards, so you can still do that in the carbon market, but not with, I don't know, are you using Vera? Is that what you're talking about? I mean, there are other standards, or are you looking at American one? I don't know about that.
No, I actually just got turned on and just joined a really cool group called Grow United, and they have that system, and they're selling it more in European and for overseas markets, and a little bit different structure, but yeah, I just felt that the third parties in the American carbon system were gaming it.
They probably were. I know that it felt that way. I didn't look into it too much because I'm not in America, so I don't have that big a network of farmers. I've got family in Kansas, in western Kansas, but even talking to them, I couldn't get them interested in doing carbon. I was like, it's got such a bad reputation. I don't think I'll even go here.
Well, and your market's been evolving longer. I've seen that there was issues with it before, and then it was corrected, and they're still evolving it. They changed that. I think they're doing another, because it's too complex. It's like how Vera, was doing all these illegal things, and it really actually affected the entire carbon market because they were allowing stuff to go through. And their response was to put out a 600-page document, which is like, there's no way I'm going to believe that. And unfortunately, that has really affected the carbon market for many years, at least 2 or 3 years now. So, but the Australian system all the people advising that I talk to are very aware of needing to make it simpler, not more complex. And even though as it is, it's still complex, they're trying to make it simpler. Like, that's the advisement. How can we make it simpler? Yeah. And my theory was when talking to American companies, by allowing our grass-fed co-op does something really unique in the fact that when we start tackling grass-fed, it's a very hard product to raise the 18 to 22 months on the ranch, because you have your cow-calf operation. You have new calves coming, and you'd have to almost reduce your herd size to accommodate the ones that you were trying to get to 22 months. That was we've tried multiple different grass-fed type companies, and in 2015, one of our partners from the Natural Beef Co-op came to us, and he said, I think I figured out how to make grass-fed work, and it involves paying farmers to raise cover crops in the winter. So our calves will go from Oregon to Idaho, and they'll graze on pastures in northern Idaho, and they will then in the winter, the ones that aren't ready by spring, they will come back and they will graze on cover crops. And once we started incentivizing the farmers to grow cover crops as another line of revenue to graze the grass-fed cattle, it was absolutely amazing how innovative they got with the type of cover crops. So they would have their cash crop come in, and they would wait to the very last minute before they couldn't get in, and then they'd go in and no-till the cover crop into the cash crop. And then the cash crop would grow. They'd harvest the cash crop, and then the cover crop would be coming right behind it.
That's great.
Yeah. So it was always this active, but I think that's where the American vision of the carbon market lost itself, because by not allowing the farmer to be directly involved in the market, by having that third-party buffer.
Oh, did that because they weren't being motivated by how to make more money and more carbon?
Yeah, they weren't.
I mean, that would have made a lot more carbon, what you just said.
Yeah, they would have innovated to solve the problem for themselves. But when you take the credit and remove it and remove the risks, then there's no reason to innovate.
Right. Well, I think that'll come back. I mean, if it comes back. I mean, I don't know how America's going with Trump's climate denying thing going into how it all pans out. So I thought it would all roll up into the term ESG, but he doesn't seem to be even doing. I haven't heard too much about ESG. Is that?
I think the thing that you'll see out of America is the Make America Healthy Again.
Yes, and that'll be more where it comes into it. I'm just interested to see where the funding and therefore all the marketing goes, because that's the thing you see in America is the marketing.
You got to have the marketing in America.
You guys are marketing kings, the global marketing kings. That's my viewpoint.
We like all that kind of stuff. I think that the interesting thing is he did hit the employment part of the USDA really hard, but he has not hold back any of the Biden's climate smart funding. So there was this, I think it was $90 million that was allocated towards creating this regenerative climate smart initiative through Biden during the Inflation Reduction Act. Our grass-fed program was part of it to encourage more people to come on and be the farmer partner that does the cover crops. And it was just coming to fruition. And as far as we know, as of the last 2 weeks, that program, there hasn't been anything to say stop that.
I saw an announcement today saying NIH had been cancelled. All climate-related programs in the USDA had been stopped. I don't know what that means, but I just saw that post today with RFK. I mean, I just sort of feel like a lot of that stuff that I can see is about routing out things that aren't really what they say they are, and they'll repackage them as something else. Like, to me, the carbon market will be repackaged under ESG, and environment, you're still going to, how are you going to measure biodiversity? Because all the things we're talking really about, water penetration, biodiversity, carbon structure, they're very difficult to measure without using something like a stable element like carbon as a measurement, because your carbon improves with biodiversity and water penetration. They're not isolated. So that's why I believe in the carbon market, is because it's simpler. Because the biodiversity metric that everyone's talking about, I'm like, all right, well, how are you going to baseline biodiversity? Because biodiversity goes up and down based on the water and what's happening in the world and the atmosphere and everything. It's opportunistic.
Well, I think that might be where you might see the diversion. I think that might get pinned back to the value per acre holistically, and carbon will be a part of that, but it'll be the biodiversity of those acres and how much.
Do you mean like what they call natural capital? Like the banks value land based on natural capital? Yeah. Is that what you mean? Yeah, natural capital is already in all the banking models for valuing land for real estate. I'm sure you've already got it in your model, because we haven't even talked about what you do with that.
I built it into my model, but the banks do not.
Well, they do here. In Australia, it's been around for a while now.
So if you go say a ranch gets listed in the United States, that ranch, the way that the price is determined is by comparing as many like acreage ranches as will match it. They don't look at water. They're starting to look at water a little bit more, but they don't look at soil, and they don't look at the water slightly. And then they don't even they'll compare one ranch that's on one side of a mountain range that has less water climate-wise or shorter growing periods, and that won't even factor in.
So when you're doing evaluation with a farm, when you're going out and doing evaluation, do farmers not go and do soil tests and see if it'll grow food and see what that's like really standard here, is you go and do a soil test to see what the soil is like? None of that's part of the evaluation. See, there is an article in that movie we both are talking about, the soil thing. One of the things he does is they've got obviously a farmer with not a lot of money, so a biodynamic farmer, and he's growing very regeneratively for a long time ideologically, and he doesn't own the land, he's leasing it, and they don't even give him any warning. They're about to go in and test it, and literally one day or the next he just ditches the lease and plows it all in, because it's going to grow really good. He'll get really good bumper yields out of that soil that's been developed, which is why farmers that I've spoken to are always trying to get the money up to go into a deal where they own the land, so that can't happen to them, because otherwise they're wasting all their efforts developing other people's land. But that value add the farmer has done is called natural capital here, and there is a financial physical model of that in banks for it, and part of the valuation, and it's been around for quite a long time here. So I'm interested to hear there's none of that over there in America, because you must have very different farms, and it must be known. You must know where you're going out. Oh, that one's going to be really good because it's already got 20 years of development on it.
Well, the guys in the know which ones are good,
right?
Anecdotally, most of the people that I have that come in and buy ranches or farms here are not. They might have done it when they were a kid, or it might be a dream of them.
So they're like hobby farmers. They don't really know what they're doing.
No, yeah, they have aspirations and a very altruistic approach, but they don't really know what to look for.
Okay, that's interesting, because I understood that the majority of farming globally was because of the commodity markets, they'd had to get bigger and amalgamate in order to stay in the business, so they would know absolutely what the value of land was if they'd been farming for 5 generations. But I don't know really what's going on there.
If you just look at the general numbers of the decline of organic matter in the United States.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. So it says that that's not how the trajectory, the trend of farmland values is going up and your soil organic matter is going down.
Yeah, which doesn't make any sense why it's going up. That's like, yeah, it's not logical.
Because it's better than the other land that's available. It's still better.
So they are getting a value add for the quality of the soil. This is not recognized.
Yeah. So, and that's what I think that people are going to get more sophisticated about that. But
you do it in your valuations? Because I see in your notes you said that you were a real estate farm valuer. Like that's actually what you do as a business. So tell me a little bit about, because I saw that you've done about $50 million worth of sales in the last sort of 4 years since 21. So what would you attribute that primarily to? Where's your main sort of success been in that?
I have identified, I'll tell you a really quick story. I got the opportunity to work with this rancher in Central Oregon, sort of southeastern Oregon. He had 1,600 acres and he was selling 300 acres of it. And I was going to sell that part. Well, they had a heart attack and the ranch went into probation with his family and he had 10 heirs. So they just decided to sell it. So since I was the real estate agent that had that little piece, they just kept me on and said, let's help us work through this. So the lawyer calls me one day and he goes, well, can you do a competitive price analysis on this whole ranch? And I said, yeah, no problem. I worked the day on it and gave him it back. And it was $2.4 million. And so I let it be at that, and probates take a long time in the United States. So it's just and about 6 weeks later, he called me back. He was mad. And he goes, I got caught with my pants down because of your stupid competitive market analysis. And I said, what are you talking about? And he goes, they put it out to somebody else in the value of the ranch. They put the value at the 1,600 acres at $680,000. And I said, what are you talking about? I said, send me the comparison. And then they sent me it, and they'd used properties that didn't have any water on them. This particular property had 400 acres of water rights, which is like a private property right in
it's huge.
the United States.
If you don't have water, you don't have anything.
Yeah. And they had pulled similar type of acreage, but with no water rights and no really, it was an old Jippo ranch. So it wasn't the best facilities, but he at least had some, and he had some infrastructure and some pumps. And so I explained it all to the lawyer, and he did most of the negotiation and ended up selling it, but he sold it for 2.7. So anyways, those are the kind of things when my model comes in handy, because I can help them better put on what the actual value is, because, well,
you've got experience. You know what everything costs.
Yeah. Anyway, it's probably very well known around the world that the United States in some of our business transactions are always, I guess, forthright. So if anybody can get an edge on somebody, they try and do it. So it's always nice to have people that can help be sort of neutral and say, no, this is why this is where it is.
So are you getting how far is your reputation sort of extending for doing real estate valuation then?
I've made more people mad than I've helped a lot of people, but I've made a lot of people mad.
Because you're undervaluing them, or because of what?
Well, a lot of people want to buy, and I overvalue what they think is.
They want to buy. They want to get it cheap, and you're showing it's worth a lot more. I get it.
And typically, with the exception of a couple of listings, everything I've sold everything I've been involved in is sold very close to what I had priced at. It might not happen as fast as it did traditionally, but you get a good quality buyer.
And tell me, what is because one of the problems we're seeing is that the price of the land is way beyond what a farmer can actually make a living off. So young people can't buy in because the valuation is so much higher than, let's say they got the money together and they have to pay that money back to the bank. The land doesn't actually make enough revenue because of global market forces to pay that. So it's not commensurate, which is land used to be commensurate with a living. So you could earn a living off land, but it's become so disparate. There's a really big problem with that occurring, with young people not being able to get into land. Is it the same there?
Yeah, very much the same. Then also, this sort of goes into that soil thing. If you can find a piece of property that is not as desirable, that has bad soil quality, but has the water,
You can build it up.
Yeah, so there's a lot of deal. Yeah, there's a lot of deals to be had if you know where to look. And the other thing is, I have conversations about this and have been having it about 4 years, is the ranch is here typically appreciate 2 to 6% every year. So that compounds over time. And that's one of the things that they don't look at. I don't think you can cash flow. You have to look at ranching, and we look at it in the United States as in an investment. A lot of people will sell a ranch, and we have what they call 1031 exchange. We take the proceeds of that ranch and you move it into a larger ranch and use it for your down payments to start your financing on the larger ranch, and you don't get taxed when you make that transition. So there's a lot of creative ways that you can finance land, especially if you start with something. Sometimes it's to get into farming or to get into ranching, you might have to start out with something that's less desirable than what your dreams or aspirations might be. But it is nearly impossible. But I've seen a number of younger people do it, and it just takes a lot of discipline, and it takes a lot of financial savvy.
Do you offer the education as well? Is that part of your service?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty cheap. I'm pretty free with my advice. So we just sold a nice little 180 acre place with water on it to some kids a couple that were in their mid to late 20s, and they'd built up their cow herd, and they'd been leasing ground and working on it, and they were able to swing it, and they were sort of on the fence about it. I said, this doesn't have to be your forever ranch. Built your equity up in it. And then after you feel like you can really trade it for a value, you just trade up to your next place. And if you just keep doing that, pretty soon you have a pretty good piece of land put together.
My understanding is that the average farmer in America is closer to their 70s or 80s. Here it's in late 60s, but they're about 10 years older in America as the average farm age. So there must be a number of them that are getting to the point where they're going to have to sell, if not.
Yeah. Well, Australia and the United States are in the same position with the baby boomers. So we'll be both going through the largest transition of wealth in the history of mankind. And a lot of that is farmland, from agriculture lands. It's good to trade. And what I see is a whole new class of buyers coming into the market. But a lot of people are fearful of that. But the other thing is, when I go back and look at deeds from my parents, my ancestors actually came through San Francisco from Ireland. So we've only been here about 6 generations. So when you look back at the deeds, a lot of the big ranches here were owned by the Bank of San Francisco or banks in New York. And then in the 80s, there was a whole period of time when ranches that regular families are on now were owned by insurance companies. So there's transitions. There's these different times when there's different classes of ownership. Corporations, when they own it, don't seem to last. This next iteration of them might last longer, but it doesn't seem to be. It seems like at some point, ranching or farming, it goes through these highs and lows, and there's a better asset class that those companies can be in, so they move out of that.
So do you have a comment, just thinking about what you're just saying there, I keep seeing all this stuff about, Bill Gates and sort of large entities buying up the majority of the land in America and taking it out of production and into bison or something else. Are you observing that at all, or is that just stuff on the internet?
In the 90s, it was Ted Turner.
Okay.
Millions of acres of land, and was going to turn it all back to nature and conserve it and run buffalo on it. And so he bought all these buffalo and he turned it out. And now the Ted Turner ranches are managed production herds of buffalo, and they're run like a business. It didn't work financially for Ted Turner to do what he originally wanted to do, so he had to adapt. Bill Gates started with the idea that he was going to farm. The interesting thing is, if anybody that's listening, American or international, if you want to hear a great podcast about American agriculture, there's one called The Ghost Herd. It happened in the podcast is called Ghost Herd, and it gets referred. There was a 60,000 acre ranching operation in Washington. It had pivots. It produced hay, corn, all sorts of farming, and had a feedlot that fed 70,000 head of cattle off of what this farm produced. His name was Cody Easterday, and he was playing the commodities, and got very far behind, to the point where he was $25 million behind on his futures tradings at different times. He ended up losing the ranch, and it got split up. So there was this big bidding war when they had to dissolve it through bankruptcy. It was between Bill Gates and the agriculture division of the Mormon Church. It's undisclosed, but they think that 60,000 acres sold for over $260 million.
Wow.
And the Mormon Church went toe to toe with Bill Gates and bought that. And the Mormon Church agriculture side is really heavily invested in agriculture across the United States. So Bill Gates isn't just out. He has to battle to get those acres. And some of them he might not have to, but it's not like he's uncontested.
I have no idea. So that was right. It's interesting for you to talk about that. I have just no concept of what's going on in America on that level.
The other thing it makes me what even makes me think about more is for decades, the Mormon Church was able to go and buy relatively cheap land. And then for them to put such a premium on this one to the point where they outbid Bill Gates, that just tells me during this big transition of wealth, just how valuable agriculture land in the United States or anywhere is.
Is it pivotal? I mean, what is it about that 60,000 acres that's worth that much?
Lots of water, really good production. It's in more fertile places in Washington.
So it is a particularly good piece of land.
Yeah.
So maybe they've got natural capital in their model.
I think those big type of investors do have their own. They build it in, and you have to. It's basically a hedge. And I work with investors that are, not many of them have actually bought land, but I've been working with one guy for 3 years now, and he keeps refining and refining so that he can get that edge that makes it valuable to the people that will be investing with him and going forward.
And are they buying land to put managers in? Is that the majority of what they're doing? And are there managers out there that are good at managing natural capital now?
Yeah, I think there is, but they have to manage more. They might manage multiple operations, oversee different people and bring people on. Another good example is Ted Turner's Turner Ranches has really set up a really good apprenticeship and managers that they train. They really work and train the people that are within that organization.
I've been wondering, because I had a feeling that the difference between Australia and America is that when you guys decide to do something, you get on and do it. Like, it's just not you don't hold back, you get going. Australians are very individualistic as a culture. So we're operating almost totally in isolation and nobody else will listen to them. We are our own person. We're not listening to what you're doing. So unless you come on it by yourself, it's not going to happen. Whereas in America, you just see this growing collective occurs. Just spreads like wildfire. They protest in large groups. They have these big movements. Like, it's such a large wave of energy happens in America. It's very, very different to here. Even the polarization of your left and right, you see it swinging and what's going with it. It's like, you've got 26 million people. We've got 26. It's just nothing. So, and most of it's desert. So, we're very, very isolated from everything. Global markets, sentiments, cultural movements. It's so different. That's why I ask you, because I figure anything I'm hearing on the internet isn't going to be what's really happening on the ground.
No, there's the groundswell in interest about investing in agriculture is phenomenal right now.
Right.
And
so you said that your network had grown. Is that mainly LinkedIn, or where is the majority of the people following you from?
Mostly LinkedIn, yeah. Honestly, I started really researching regenerative agriculture in 2014, and one of my first introductions was a New Zealander, I believe, Nicole Master.
Yeah, Nicole. I went to her workshop actually in Tasmania about a week ago.
Yeah,
I've been following her for years. She's great.
And she's been to my sister's ranch in Nevada. Yeah. Anyway, I had a podcast back in 2014, and she was one of the first people I talked to. Yeah. So, and she is the one that really introduced me to the organic nitrogen cycle.
Right.
And that just blew my mind. That was one of the key things that set me down the path that I've been studying for 10 years to get to where I am now. I think the reason I have a following on LinkedIn is because I'm very transparent with everything I'm doing and what I'm thinking, wrong or right, or for better or worse, but everybody knows what logic I'm applying to my own operation.
I love it because I do follow you for a while now. And the thing I like is that you do things like you walk along the road and you say, this is what I'm thinking right now. And then you just say it as it is. There's no like effort to be anything or push an agenda. You actually say what you're going through. And I think that's speaks to, or the authenticity of it speaks to, I think, people that are in similar situations to you or not, but, wanting to be. So I think it's a very genuine, I would recommend people to follow Rich on LinkedIn because he does a lot of posting.
The other thing is, I really dislike the evergreen agricultural marketing. I think it gives consumers unrealistic expectations of how their food is brought to them.
Right. And by that, you mean only in good rainfall places with the vegetables and the little hobby farmers and the everything that's sort of idealistic.
Yeah, I always tell anybody when I talk about regenerative agriculture, so much of it is driven by, and I always get in trouble for saying this, it's driven by those 10-acre to 100-acre farms. But for regenerative agriculture to work in the United States or anywhere, you have to convince the guy that's on the tractor in Modesto, California, or in Indiana or Iowa that it's worth doing. And you got to convince that it's worth doing with his entire investment. The multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment that he has, the investment he has in land and fertilizer and all that kind of stuff. That's how you change the system. The stories in the smaller acreages are wonderful and very inspiring, but you have to be able to talk to the guy in Modesto.
I'm going to tell you a little story because I've been out, I think you might know I wrote this book. Yeah. And I was on a plane. I'd just done a big machinery, one of the largest machinery shows. I'd done the largest sheep show in the world. I'd been to this one, was machinery. I'm like looking at this stuff. The irony of all these massive machines which are compacting the earth. And I'm there talking about like not compacting the earth. Anyway, I was on the way back on a plane. I started talking with this guy from the sugar industry. He'd been in the sugar industry is like the abattoir industry over there. It's closed shop. They're like, you don't get in. They're in their own world. And I was on this little plane with him telling him about my book. And he said, look, I know the president of the sugar industry said, if you could just say what you just said to me, like it's really hard to get in. I said, well, look, I'll give you the book. And he said, I haven't read a book in 30 years. And I said, oh God. Well, I said, look, I don't know. I'm told it's about a 4-hour read. Give me your feedback. And he said, I won't get through it. Anyway, he rang me twice, once to say, I'm halfway through. I can't believe it. And the second time he rang me and said, I just want to say thank you because I didn't think I could learn anything more about the landscape and you've changed my mind. And I was like, I was so moved because that's like, could I want anything better? That was just like, oh my God, like, that's so fantastic because, that's a totally different industry because mainly like you, I'm talking to graziers and to me, it's pretty simple with animals. It's just about change of management. If you've got water and you can make the grasses grow by moving the animals differently, it's a pretty simple concept. But with cropping, it's particularly monocultures, it's a whole other thing. And I've been really delving into the no-till and all that sort of cropping area to get a bit more of a bead on it to understand if I am communicating with them so I'm not talking totally in the dark. But it actually correlates. It works in all of fields. It's about microbes and, making the microbiology work in whatever way you want to do it. So I found that really interesting that you can change mindsets, and because I sort of thought it was impossible with farmers.
Interesting thing I learned about masting when we have more native grasslands. So when they mast, they release, and trees, this is more studied in like.
What is masting? I don't know this word.
It's when plants every 5 or 6 years just release a exorbitant amount of seeds.
Okay.
And the vermin come up, and it looks really like my fields are all scarred up because the vermin had surged after this masting event. So it actually sort of aerated everything, but it doesn't look pristine. And what I learned about masting that has to do with cultivation is that the masting is communicated. So we don't cultivate in this 20,000 acre place where we ranch with all these, my neighbors. Very seldomly does any field get cultivated. So when the masting event happened, if you look at a place where there's cultivation that happens, it'll be isolated to the fields where the least amount of cultivation was done. But if you look at it over 20,000 acres, it's communicated through the microceum network. Okay, it's time to mast. and it happens on huge scale because that mycelium network communicates across. And what happens with the cultivation and the plows and the discs is it disrupts the network. Yeah.
Signaling, the communication. Yeah.
And we're just learning about the mycelium network. And I think that we're going to learn just how vastly important it is to keep it intact and not disrupt it like we have in the past. Some of our cover crop farmers still do minimal tilling, like just the inch or two.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're having good success with it because I don't think they're getting deep enough to disrupt that whole network. They're letting it maintain.
Yeah, well, they call it quorum sensing, where the mycelium actually communicates instantaneously across thousands of hectares, like the way the internet does. It's the global internet of the land. And that just blows my mind. That's so amazing. And I'll tell you maybe a little bit later, I've just bought this piece of equipment which changes that into a sound so you can hear it.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm just starting to muck around with it and learn about it. But apparently the plants start to learn that they can communicate to you through that sound, and they change their sound with you, particularly if they see you as, friend. I assume. So I've just bought it, and I've known plants can communicate and have memory and pain and all that sort of stuff since tests. Well, I know since the 50s, but apparently they were being done since the 1800s.
And grow towards running water.
Yes, lots of things, lots of stuff that when I say this word science, I feel like it's such an incorrect encapsulation of the journey of human endeavor and observation of what is. And we tend to think of it as the stuff going on in universities because it's got the name around it and the marketing, but the farmer is the scientist, the observer is the scientist, everybody who is observing and learning. And I'm always blown away by conversations with particularly long-term farmers that have observed things and gotten changes through what they've observed.
I think the real change makers are Nicole Masters, Gabe Brown, Alan Savory.
At the educators.
Yeah, but they're not the traditional academic. They're more on the ground.
Absolutely. No, I loved Nicole's course. I did a workshop with her in Tasmania. And I just, I'm always fascinated that I've been in this 27 years and I don't farm anything. And I'm fascinated that despite all the things that I have attended, learned and read and written, I can learn something new. I'm like, my God, every time I'm learning something absolutely fascinating.
The other interesting thing, so a lot of my LinkedIn network is very engaged in different things. So I learned more from them. And when I was talking about what I learned about masting, a gentleman said he knew about it in his forest on the East Coast. He said that the morels, the mushrooms that grow above the ground, start changing the year before the masting. And a lot of the times the masting event is brought on by a climate change. So that is a really curious thing, is like, how good is the network? And like, can it predict the weather a year in advance?
It's probably sensing something. And the mushroom you see is the spores, is the babies. Yeah. Like the actual mycelium is underneath the ground. But if you think that if something's going to be really bad, every species on the planet will make babies because that's the last thing it does to outsurvive killing its species off. So that would make sense that you're getting this sporing of seeds in prolific numbers because something bad is coming. And it's sensing it for lots of different reasons, quorum sensing it.
That blew my mind that mushroom was preparing for something that was going to happen a year from then. And you don't know if it's sending the signal to make it happen or if it just knows that that's what's going to happen. So I think that we're going to find that I keep telling people we knew a lot about soil 10 years ago. We knew even more 5 years ago, and we know more now. And I think that what we're going to learn about soil with all these extra technologies and being able to interact, create, and map the relationships more is just going to be mind-boggling. Then when you transfer it up to our physical health and our physical well-being, I think that we're going to see that we made some really tragic mistakes.
Well, I think that's obvious, isn't it? That's how we learn as a species. We make mistakes and then we hopefully learn and move on. It really seems to be about how much is the intelligence squashed by people wanting to keep the status quo that's the issue. The money holding something in a certain way because they want to keep getting as much money out of it as possible. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I don't know which way that one's going to go. Saying about the mushrooms, I think the thing is that we forget that there's only generally in most places one growing season a year. If you were to time your life as a plant in, say, 3 months, the rest of the time you're dormant, those 3 months, lots of signals coming into you about where the state of the atmosphere is before you go. I think about this in Australia, we've got creatures that, or fish, there's whole lakes that go down, burrow into the ground for 7 or 8 years. And then they know when the water hits, they're up, they make babies in 3 days and they're done everything and they're back down on the ground again. And so you realize there's so much more awareness about what's going on of the organism of the planet and the sphere around the planet that's feeding into the plants. And the more we learn to in tune with that and do ayahuasca, why those shaman were doing that and what they're actually tapping into to heighten their ability to understand what the plants are understanding. To me, it's opening up a limbic brain thing that's got to do with when we had to survive by nature, which we've shut ourselves off in buildings with lights and air conditioning. You know, like we don't have to do that now. So why would we have that connection anymore?
Yeah, I think you put that eloquently. And I think that even the food that we're eating is probably disrupting that system.
Yes, absolutely. And I would say, as someone who's been really trying, because I sort of started in 97 with all things an observation that Americans were feeding babies as young as 6-month-old Prozac for mood behavioral problems. And I went, what? That's got to be food. Like, there's no way you teach a baby something wrong. And it was kind of that triggered me to really go down this thing, because we were feeding 50,000 customers a week. And I was like, well, what are we doing? You know, and then, you know, mad cow happened and all these sort of things, and GMOs. And I've never come out of that rabbit hole. I've been fascinated ever since. But I think this next level is we're almost starting to come full circle back to the realm of the pagan witch. I've always considered we had to go from that intuitive into this highly industrialized scientific mind thing, because people were being, well, only I have the knowledge. I'm the witch. I'm the one with the great, you know, wizard skills, and you don't have it. And my thing is always, we all have it. Nobody doesn't have it. We have to all recognize how to exercise those muscles, our intuitive muscles, and find a way back into them again. Yeah, I'm very excited about the future, which is why I'm doing this podcast, because I really want people to realize, no matter how bad it is right now, that it's worth persisting. And which is why I've been asking people that are, I know, fascinated by nature and keep going. Like, I've often wanted to give up, or not even often, have wanted to give up and gone, yeah, but what would I do? This is my calling. I have to keep doing this. So,
well, you do a good job. So I appreciate it.
So for you, what have been the things that have helped you get through, like, the worst times for you in terms of continuing on in this regen path with, let's say, so much against you, like might have turned now? But
I think it goes back to what you were talking about. That connection is probably what I value most. And the more that I understand that relationship that we have with it was always, for my family, it's always been about the relationship between the cattle. And that was really a deep and rich relationship. And that people make fun of us because my family has cattle on its mind a lot across the whole family. There's not anybody that diverged from that, really. And
it's part of an animal.
So we're cow people, and we're really into it. We've tried multiple different types of raising cattle, and we're about as basic as cattle raisers. Like, we've reduced all our inputs. We're just really sort of that nature. But as we reduced the inputs, then the nature became more important. And now that I rotating more and watching my soils more and understand that what's going on underneath the ground, like Adrian McSkane, Crass Productivity from France. Anyways, he was one of the influences of Savory when he wrote Holistic Resource Management.
Okay.
Called Grass Productivity. He actually died in Cuba trying to help the Cubans. That evening, the evening before he died, he had a dinner with Fidel Castro, and they were trying to save Cuban agriculture. He was a really unique human being, but he made a statement that stuck with me, and I had to learn it over and over again. But you need to take care of the livestock under the ground as much as you take care of and they should weigh about the same.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and so that's what we've done a lot of chemical stuff to disrupt that balance.
Hey, you know, this might be interesting for you. I saw a quick post, and it was, do you know why a cow puts on weight or gets as big as he is? And you go, oh, because he's eating the grass. Well, no, because the grass is just fiber and it sits in their gut and it ferments. So, and it's creating a gas. So what are they eating? Well, actually, it's all the microbes. They're actually digesting the protein out of the microbe. It's not the grass. The grass is the food for the microbes that are in them. And the microbes are is the protein that the second gut is digesting to make the muscle of the animal. Isn't that fascinating? I hadn't thought about that.
I had never thought about that either.
I know. I went, oh, that's so logical. Because, of course, it's protein. There's no protein really in grass, a little bit in seeds, but it's only seeding at a certain time of the year. So, yeah, it's getting it from the microbes. They're digesting the microbes.
The grass gives them the sugar to digest the protein. Yeah, that makes sense.
It was a visual on Instagram, and I went, oh, that's so good. I did post it. I don't know, you would have missed it. I post so often, I'm sure people don't see what I'm posting.
Yeah, I see quite a bit of your posts. I don't see them all, though.
I would say from what you were saying about the cows, that when you feel something traumatic or difficult for you, you go out and spend time with the cows. And the cows bring you back to a sense of purpose. Would that be about what you're saying?
Be in the open air, and then you just sort of grounds you and you realize what your priorities should be. And I mean, there's a lot of noise in the world. And I'm not special anyways. Anybody can get in their car and drive out and be somewhere quiet and just observe the natural world around you. And then you don't feel as alone, and you don't feel as important as your problem. You probably thought your problem was, because the tapestry, the grandeur of what is going on in our natural systems and our ecosystems is infinitely more rewarding than what we deal with algorithms. And
what about the farmer suicide issue? Like, we've got 2 a day suiciding in Australia, and I believe it's getting up pretty high in America as well. Do you come across much of that? And do you have ways of helping people through that by getting them to go and be more in nature? I mean, they're kind of in nature, so.
I think that the thing that helps me the most is none of it really matters. There's this great line from a movie about these guys getting lost in the wilderness, and the guy goes, you know what kills most people in the wilderness? And the guy goes, no, I don't. And he goes, it's shame. Shame kills most people. I got to a point in my life, there's a lot of things that go off the rails and a lot of stuff, but I think I just realized that shame's something that you can deal with. It's not, you can choose. The rest of it's really not all that important. Your family's important. Your food's important. The ecosystem around us is important. The rest of it's just busyness.
Noise.
Yeah. And so just go ground yourself. But like I've found, and I tried to learn this over and over and over again. And I finally got to an age where, if you just sit for 10 minutes really quietly, then you can meditate, or you just breathe and think about what your next steps are. You can get through nearly anything, but nothing's worth that. When you take your life, that's the ultimate. I don't know. It's just, I think that people have shame, and that's why they do it. And there's no reason to have shame. It's completely human complex. And it's like, if you hang around with your cow dog, they don't have any shame. I mean, they might get embarrassed or they might feel bad for a while, but I don't think they experience shame like we do.
No, I've got to say, a dog feeling embarrassed is a very amusing thing. They're so universal with it too. Oh, I'm so sorry. They're morbidly upset.
That's the other thing. Twitch is out with my girlfriend on the other side of the office. He comes to work with me. He drives out to the ranch with me. I think people need to have animals in their life. Cats or dogs or cattle or whatever it is. A lot of horse people out there, but it's all, I think that the more strings that you can connect back to the ecosystem and to natural systems, the more grounded you'll be. And then you'll see that all these things that create shame and the noise are really just that. They're just sort of artificial constructs that we build up in our space monkey brains.
What is Twitch? What sort of dog is he?
He is I call him Great Basin stock dog, but they're basically a variation of a border collies. They're much more long-legged and
they can cover big distances.
Shorter hair, but you guys have shorter hair. Yeah. Between the Kelpies and the border collies. So they've evolved that way in the Great Basin, very similar to what they look like in Australia.
So, is there anything else that you would like to say or you'd like to share with your your or other audiences that this might tap into that you have not yet spoken to that's in your industry in terms of getting in touch with you for valuations on land or finding land that you can help them make regenerative or any of things along those lines?
You can reach me on LinkedIn. That's good, but I don't really have a big business pitch that just sort of finds me. And if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. But
Enough.
I will give everybody a warning, and I think that this needs to be on the forefront of everybody's mind is let's start getting away from glyphosates. If you study glyphosates, they are one of the most horrifying things that I have come across in my lifetime. I think that
Speak a little bit about why that is, because it's big in America, but in Australia, we haven't stopped using it at all.
well, we haven't really either, and we're still trying to force other countries to do it. But it was supposed to be pretty harmless to mammals.
And maybe we'll say the brand name is Roundup for people that don't know what a glyphosate.
Yeah. And it complements GMOs. So sometimes I wonder if it was the GMOs that were the problem or the chemicals that came with them. And because they're complementary to each other. And the scary thing about glyphosates is they kill pests, which you're killing that livestock under the ground that we were talking about. And it takes forever to recover. So since we've been using glyphosate since the early 70s, our soil organic matter has declined. Also, our mental health, our physical health, the nutrition density of our food. And the new studies are, and this is all very subjective, but I think if you listen to that intuition that we were talking about, you're going to know that this is true, is that glyphosate crosses the blood-brain barrier. And what's in glyphosate goes through your brain, and when it comes over, it brings heavy metals with it, which is problematic. But what it does is glyphosate still acts like glyphosate, and it gets through that connection between the brain and the gut, and it completely obliterates your gut microbiome, which is incredibly important to regulating your mental health. We got the crazy political situation over here, and it just seems like everybody in the United States is amped up. And at no time have we had a greater concentration of glyphosate in our atmosphere than now. And I think that it's probably one of the most dangerous things that's happening in the world right now. And so I would say, everybody, if you take anything from this podcast, go out, learn about glyphosate, and we have got to move on from this chemical. It's going to kill us as a species.
Yes, glyphosate. And I will say that Zach Bush, the medical doctor, actually does touch on this and say it's within 20 seconds of contact with the tight junctions. They're the things in your stomach. It unbinds them and allows food that shouldn't be able to get through your gut into your blood because of that glyphosate. That's what leaky gut is. So avoiding it, it's hard because it's in so many things, and you've got to be so vigilant because as a consumer, you don't know that the product you've got has had glyphosate used on it in the growing process, and it does persist, and it is epigenetic, and it does go through generations and all of those issues. So I am here backing Rich, on everything he's saying about glyphosate.
Anyways, it's the worst horror movie I've ever come across, and it's happening in real life, and it's happening to all of us, and it just is infinitely scary to me.
Have you managed to find a way to get it out of your family's diet in every way?
We're very fortunate, and so much is that it all comes down to money. We never cultivated crops here. We never used glyphosate. I don't use pesticides on my cattle anymore. So I'm going to start testing my soils for glyphosates and the cattle for glyphosates.
What about the food that you buy and eat at home, though? Like a lot of farmers live in what I call food deserts. Like they might grow something really big, but their local food they can buy for themselves, unless they're doing their own veggie garden, is pretty lean.
It's very challenging. I'm pretty sure our beef is safe, so we'll be eating more of our own beef, probably less chicken, less pork, and then I'm thinking about more gardening and just whole foods. But even then, it's still sprayed with it's pretty hope. I want to use that word, but we have a real issue, and we just need to figure out. We have to pretty much figure out that this is not something that we can.
There's a thing in America called the Dirty Dozen, which is a website which gives the prime things to avoid, and it's mainly things that are easily attacked by bugs. Because and outcompeted very easily. Like a lot of people don't realize hummus or chickpeas and lentils are very delicate plants, and they get sprayed 2 or 3 times through the growing season. Whereas something like a carrot, the main thing they're trying to do is stop light from affecting it by overgrowth, so they can burn the shadow, and that's so that the carrot will grow straight. So it's like these crazy sort of things. That's why.
Bread.
And sourdough bread, which is made from a starter, which is good.
It actually dissolves the glyphosate a little bit, not wholly, but it's better than regular bread.
I didn't know it did that with the glass. I think there's a lot more that we'll learn, and I think the fact that we're still alive is a pretty good indication that we've been adapting and finding ways to adapt to these chemicals. Because it's not just glyphosate. We have vast numbers of chemicals in our systems that for some reason we're still alive. I'm amazed by the human organism. It does totally amaze me.
It's like cows. They're one of the toughest creatures on earth. It's amazing what they can go through. But
yeah,
I don't try and purposely put my cows in peril. So I think that we're sort of along the same lines.
Yeah. Well, look, it's been wonderful talking to you, Rich, and thank you for coming on the podcast. And I will put in the show notes how to get in touch with you. Did we say what the name of it was other than LinkedIn? Do you have a business name?
So Carn grass-fed cattle.
Carn, C-A-R-N.
Yep.
And that's an A with a little accent on it?
Yeah, you don't have to put the accent on it.
Okay.
It's too hard for Americans to do that, but you guys might.
French? Is that French or Spanish?
Irish.
It's Irish.
This was my part of the country was my family's Fitzgerald and Taylor's and Barry's. And there's these sheep herders. We came up here with sheep originally from San Francisco after they built sheep. We built what they call a stone boy. That's what we called them on the rims where the water was so that the sheep herder could see with the flock where to bring the cattle or the sheep for water. And I did research on it and I could only find the use of stone boy in the United States. In Ireland, they're called Carn.
Okay, so it's called Carn Ranch, Carn grass-fed beef. And your valuation business for farms is under the same business name?
No, it's High Country Real Estate.
High Country Real Estate. So this man is the man to go to help you find a farm if you want to get out there and do it. So would you say what would be the starting price for a young farmer wanting to get in on some average land to turn around? What do you think you could help them look at? What is the average farmer coming to you that looks trying to get into some land?
We've got some people in for just a little bit over $500,000, and then you could get in for between $1.5 million and $500,000. million. And if you want to really do intensive like farming and on a smaller acreage and you have the water, I think that it could do it. We just have sort of ranch oriented cattle type people here. So don't have many people looking for that intensive farming land. But I think that if you had the water availability to do it, you could start a lot cheaper.
And develop the soil a lot quicker too.
Yes.
All right. Well, wonderful talking to you, Rich. I'm glad we finally got to connect.
All right. I'll be looking forward to it. And thank you.
Okay. Bye. You too. Bye.